Can I have some nods? Great, thank you, Jag. It's a real pleasure to be here today. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Putting this together then was a bit of a challenge because I'm already operating in I'm presenting to a group of experts, so there's nothing like that to make you feel fairly self-conscious. So I've just decided to be real and to talk about some areas of practice that I'm particularly proud of, that really have sparked joy in me. A little bit of Marie, what's her name there? But also embracing the fact that some of this is scary. Some of this is really, really challenging. So starting off, and you can also possibly discern my sense of humour. Living the dream, sometimes a nightmare. It feels like sometimes bringing together all of the components of our practice can be both a life-affirming process, but also at the same time something that speaks to the core of who we are and challenges us on that basis as well. So when I was choosing a picture for this cover, this title slide, I wanted to get a picture of somebody skydiving. And then I discovered the awesome sport of skydiving combined with scuba. And I thought there's no better metaphor than I could really find for how I feel on a daily basis, that I'm leaping out of an aircraft with a parachute on my back. Hopefully, I'm about to plunge into an ocean of freezing water, possibly with sharks in it as well. So I'd like to spend the next 45 or so minutes just exploring a little bit of my practice with you. If at any point anything that I'm saying isn't clear, please pop that into the chat, or if I drop offline, Jag will be emceeing for me, and I'd be really happy to chat this through at the end if people still have time. To those who have to leave early, thank you for coming along in the first place. I really appreciate you making time in your busy schedules. Okay, so this is me around 10 years ago. You can see looking considerably younger, considerably more naive, considerably slimmer pre-pandemic. But I'd like to still think that this was an authentic me, somebody that came to my practice full of ideas, full of, I'm going to use this word several times, hopefully, joy, but also with an awareness that there was something different about the teaching focused role. And at that point in my life and my career, I wasn't entirely sure how to articulate that, but I think it's something that has become much more prevalent in the way I kind of engage with my practice now. That said, and acknowledging what I'll say, not just the elephant in the room, but the giant, ancient woolly mammoth that lumbers around, I think, all of our work. I don't want to talk explicitly about, or I won't present explicitly, the ideas that we have around the differences between ourselves and our TNR colleagues. I've chosen the picture here very deliberately, and my apologies for its lack of inclusivity and diversity, but I think one of the best metaphors that I can offer in terms of what we face as teaching focused professionals is the metaphor of the sublime dancing partnership of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. And you know what they say about Ginger Rogers. She did everything that Fred Astaire did, but backwards and in heels. So to me, that's kind of what it feels like to be a teaching-focused academic. We're expected to do everything the same as our TNR colleagues, but backwards and in heels. And there are moments where I ask myself, what else do I need to do to have my practice, my work taken seriously? But I do want this to be a positive focus. I want this to be something where I can express the fact that on a good day, I think I have the best job in the world. So this will be present in what I'm talking about. I'm very happy to discuss it as we go along, but I'm going to try and keep my inner snark to a minimum. What I do want to present to you then, alongside these ideas that are, say, of balancing our lives, I'm going to try and do this via 3 loosely framed case studies, each focusing on the 3 domains of practice that I identified to you. So first, internationalization. Secondly, interdisciplinarity, and third, educational leadership. What you may notice as I go through these loosely case studies is that the interdisciplinarity, the educational leadership, the internationalization is not confined to each one. What I think we do exceptionally well as teaching focused academics is integrating our practice and thinking about the ways in which aspects of our work connect with other aspects. So as I was preparing this talk, I realized there were parts of internationalization in the other two non-internationalization case studies that I was bringing to you. I'm hoping very much that the ideas that I presented in the abstract, these things will come through, but please do call me on them if you'd like to hear a little bit more about them. But I think in terms of what we do, and we do best as academics, is present the evidence. So that's exactly what I intend to do. The last thing I'd like to mention before I get into those case studies are basically to give us a framework. Now, I do want to say here that I'm not asserting that I found the silver bullet, or that the way I do this is either different or better than anybody else on this call watching this recording or out there in teaching focused practice. But it is the way that I live my academic life, that I live my professional life, and what makes sense to me. And I did say to you from the start that I wanted this to be a very real talk, this to be something that was meaningful to me and hopefully then to you. So I thought I'd share the principles, the values that I hold when I engage with my professional work. So the first thing I try and always do is to follow my passion. If I'm not enjoying it, if it isn't meaningful to me, my idea, apart from marking, which is meaningful to nobody except for our students, and not even then sometimes, if it's not fun, if it doesn't bring me something, then I try to avoid doing it or to avoid investing in it. The older I get, the more strategic I've realized I need to be, because I don't have the energy to do every opportunity that comes my way. And I need to think more strategically about what this adds to my practice, to my CV, to my way of being and my development. I try to think very carefully about stretching myself. The easiest thing in the world is to identify the things that you're good at, although imposter syndrome, I spend a lot of time challenging myself on that. But to think about ways in which I can grow. What would be good for me? What would stretch me? And I try and bring that into the way that I make decisions about my practice. But having said that, I also want to do the things that I know that I'm good at and I can contribute to. And when I'm talking about strengths here, I'm thinking about strengths-based practice from a pos-psych perspective, and just acknowledging the fact that despite the fact when I look in the mirror and I go, wow, you've aged, and time to put the smile on, time to educate young minds, actually thinking about what I'm good at and what I contribute is a way in which I can put a spring in my step every morning. The last thing that I want to suggest as a framework to evaluate what I'm going to tell you about is the idea of making connections. And I mean this in two ways. The first is about those emotional and people connections. It's been fabulous meeting and re-meeting. Lovely to see you today, Jen. Some really amazing people this morning. And those connections will lift me. And they will give me ideas and help me bring together areas of the work that I do and hopefully form new collaborations. But as an individual, as an academic, I try to make connections within the work that I do and think about how things join up that way, whether that's enabling other colleagues to network or whether I enable myself to bring different areas of my practice together in unusual and exciting ways, or what I hope are unusual and exciting ways. So with that in mind, then, I'd like to move on to my first case study, which is the cognitive science and connected learning community, which is part of the Utopia work that Warwick belongs to. So the Utopia, the European University. You will notice that I am very keen to acknowledge the work that I do collaboratively with my friends and colleagues. And again, I think that's a real strength that teaching focused academics bring to their work. We are excellent team workers as well as excellent leaders. So Utopia represents my internationalization work, and I'd like to start off by telling you a little bit about what Utopia is. So I'm not entirely aware of which institutions you all represent, but there are a number now of consortia that we have with our institutions across the globe, focusing Europe, focusing across the world. Utopia is one such consortium that Warwick is part of. As you can probably tell by the name, we are European Commission funded currently. And this is a group of primarily European institutions that came together because of sharing an ethos regarding teaching, research and innovation. We now have 10 partner institutions within Europe, and I think we have 3, it's either 3 or 5, and I didn't have time to check before I came online, international partners as well. You can see there our stated aims, and they're things that I think we'd all aspire to: academic freedom, the excellence we all strive for in our practice, sustainability, not just from an environmental perspective, but in terms of our personal resources as well. I'm very passionate about that. But also then the cooperation and openness that I think really characterises good academic practice. You can see at the bottom of this slide as well that we have a lofty aim, but by 2030, the Utopia European University will represent an open, multicultural, confederated operation of connected campuses, meaning that we actually operate in a way that's meaningful, sharing resources, sharing students, sharing staff, increasing that mobility of ideas and people. In terms of what that means for me and for my educational practice then, I'm part of what is called the Connected Learning Communities group. And what this is then, each of these constellations and the map in front of you represents a group of experts, international and largely interdisciplinary as well, that focuses in on a particular topic. So if you look towards the middle tranche, you can see there the connected community for cognitive science. That is a group that I was part of. This brought together cognitive scientists, psychologists and computer scientists to form an educational offering for the students that we shared across our Utopia community. So before I move on then, just to pause for a second, this was where my practice in this started. What I'd like to do now then is to take you through what I did with that group and how this has evolved and how this has kind of developed my practice as well. So in terms then of how we started back in around 2019, 2020, we were what was known as the incubator phase. We were one of the first generation of connected learning communities within the group. And this was formed, the Cognitive Science CLC was formed from the work that the University of Ljubljana did in an integrated master's programme in cognitive science. So they started off by leading our group. In the middle there, you can see the 2 other active partners, the University of Gothenburg and of Warwick. And on the right there, we had, I'm going to affectionately call a slightly less engaged partner, but definitely there in terms of ideas and willingness to engage. The spirit was willing, even if the flesh was slightly weak there. So this is how we started our group. And this is what inspired the initial educational offering that we gave to our students across those different universities. So being part of the embedded master's programme, the University of Ljubljana led, and they offered a cross-campus emotional induction experiment, which is harder to coordinate than you might expect, which was actually part of their programme. So this was an embedded activity. And on the top right-hand side of the slide, you can see the responsibilities that the University of Ljubljana had. They designed the task, they briefed on it, they gave lectures and sent synchronous group sessions, and offered content on both phenomenology and neuroscience of emotion. On the left-hand side, then, you can see what the University of Gothenburg brought to the table. There we had expertise in effective computing, and we looked at the interaction of effective computing and AI with emotion, and my colleague Rob Lowe there offered technical support. On the bottom right-hand side, then, we can see what I brought via the University of Warwick. So I represented my institution and was there as a psychologist with cognitive and emotion science expertise. and brought a number of workshops and recorded resources there, some ideas about the physiological measurement of emotion as well. So diversifying the experience beyond the phenomenology, which was the focus of the University of Ljubljana. Okay, so this is where we started. After 2 years, we realised that there were a number of issues that arose through presenting a student activity in this way. We had some success, students liked it, but what they liked most was the opportunity to engage with students from other institutions and from other countries. So students were keen on the internationalization approach as well. What we did realise, though, is that we weren't serving them best. We had some, let's call them partnership issues. We also had some student experience issues. So it became obvious that we needed to refresh the model. And we took the opportunity with a second round of funding to do exactly that. And this is what's on the screen there. So this was the point that I stepped into a leadership role within the group, being the only pedagogical specialist there. So I said, we need to redevelop this. Hold my beer or my cup of tea or whatever inclusive way you'd like to conceptualize this. And I'd just like to share with you the model that I'm going to say I. Have you noticed how much in teaching focused practice we say we? Because we emphasize our teamwork. I'm going to say I, because I wrote this. I designed. I'm hoping internally people are applauding and not just thinking what an egotistical nightmare this woman is. It takes a lot of effort to say I. I'm pretty sure all of us are in the same place. I designed a model then with 3 phases: task orientation, activity presentation, and then task reflection. And you can see as you move across these 3 bars, working from the left-hand side, we presented core material that was largely presented to students online in synchronous sessions. From then onwards, as you move across the bar in each of those 3 phases, you can see that more optionality, more self-directed practice is coming out. So students have choice of what they engage with, but more importantly, when they engage with it. And as you move from left to right, you're moving from core to more optional and then extended. And in the extended phase, if students were interested in a particular topic, they could delve into it more deeply. And we provided resources for all 3 of those boxes moving left to right. In terms then of why this happened and what this brought, I'd like to share with you, and I'm going to be quite candid, I think, in this next slide, why we needed to do this and what this actually enhanced in terms of what we offered to students. So the first thing that this did, well, we moved from incubation, so that sparky phase, to something that we thought was both sustainable and scalable. But it meant that we moved from a position of one particular institution leading, taking all of the responsibility, but having all the rights and all the decision-making processes as well. So this enabled us to engage more. We took away the reliance on synchronous resource. We still have some, but it reduced from an initial, okay, and please wince this because I did when I realised this was about to happen, 4 6-hour online workshops. We reduced that down because the psychologists and the pedagogical specialists went, that is not going to work. You just cannot keep people engaged for that length of time. But in terms of the partnership issues that we had, this meant that the 4 partners, partner institutions could feed in much more clearly and cleanly. And we had a much more balanced approach to rights and responsibilities. So we shared the decision-making much more effectively, and it meant that we had clearer reporting structures, decision-making structures, and ways of reflecting on our practice. Possibly even more importantly, though, this became much more transparent to our students. The time that was needed from them, the resources they had to engage with, what we expected from them, and how they could engage with greater freedom and applicability to their studies became much more obvious because we made it transparent. What we realised was in an embedded model, this was clear to the students doing their master's programme, but wasn't clear to anybody else. So it became really obvious to us that this is what we had to do. So this is what we emerged with. 4 sessions, similar to before, but this was reduced from 6 hours to 2 hours. And you can see that we put this socio-emotional bit in as well. So before each session, we had the opportunity for the students to engage with us, the academics that were presenting, and our teaching support staff. We also factored in a break in the middle, so in a very structured and predictable way. Moving from session 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, then you can see we're getting more in depth as we move for that. And what we have is a blend of activities that both orient students, reflecting that orientation stage, hopefully bring them into working together as interdisciplinary and international groups. And then in sessions 2 and 3, getting more into the focus of the work that we were doing, the technical expertise that we wanted to bring students from different disciplines into finally then presenting the findings and getting the expert opinions for a number of diverse specialists in that final session. Throughout all this, then, we had a library of resources, reading lists, videos, tutorials, links, all sorts of activities available to our participants that they could access at any point. And in between sessions 2 and 3, we asked our students to participate in a visual search task and in a biometric task. I should probably just orient you to the fact I put question marks in there because my colleague had to make a very quick change to this. And if I'm brutally honest, my colleague from Gothenburg, he didn't tell me what he was going to put into that. I still haven't quite worked out what it is. All I do know is it was communicated clearly to students, unfortunately not to me. But I love him and I forgive him. And by next iteration, I will know exactly what he's presenting. In between session 2 and 3, then, we prepared the data from those 2 experiments, ready for our students to analyse in a workshop format, bearing in mind that not every student would be familiar or confident with the particular analysis techniques we were talking about. So we did that in a workshop formation, gave them the tools and the guidance then to present those to the group. We also gave information on how we were going to ask them to formally report on their activity, again bearing in mind the different skill sets, the different competences and confidence that our students brought. Following the presentations and roundtable panel, then we asked our students to submit a brief report. Typically, we got them to do that as a group, and then we certificated their participation with the potential for students to get ECTs, so recognised micro credentials for the work they've done. We also gave them feedback on the writing and obviously sought their feedback on their experience. So all in all, a more student engaged process. Right, hopefully that was fairly clear. I'm not seeing any desperate waves from either my MC or the chat, so I'd like to move on to the second example of process. And this represented, if you like, my greatest level of interdisciplinarity and possibly the most fun that I've had whilst teaching in the last few years. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the ideas of the slow movement. This is some work that I did with my colleague and dear friend, Jo Lee, also based at the University of Warwick, co-head of the School of Modern Languages and Cultures, and an Italian scholar. So hopefully this interdisciplinarity is screaming at you loud and clear. So please forgive again our sense of humour, what the tortoise taught us. This is about the slow movement, how we embodied it and embedded it in a module that we delivered here at Warwick. So some of you may be familiar with the ideas of the slow movement, but others of you, I'm sure, are familiar with what it feels like to be a human in the modern world. Time pressure on everything. Everything has to happen faster. There has to be more of it. And we have this culture, almost this cult of speed and acceleration. If we aren't constantly connected, we worry about the people we're not connected with, but we also moan about the fact that people can get hold of us constantly. We're now, the slow movement would argue, at a at a crossroads, at a turning point where we can't sustain this level of engagement, this acceleration much further. It's damaging us as humans, it's damaging our mental health and our physical health. We can't simply be like the Red Queen in Alice Through the Looking Glass. It isn't more, faster, constantly. So the slow movement aims to push back against this cult of acceleration and speed in our lives. And it emerged in the middle of the 1980s when McDonald's attempted, and I say attempted, to put a branch at the base of the Spanish Steps in Rome. Carlo Petrini, an activist in Italy, pushed back against this, and the slow movement was born. The slow movement then attempts to step humanity off that treadmill, that constant cycle of consumerism, of increased connection, meaningless connection, and speed in everything we say and do. There are a number of domains that this has now emerged in, and I would say that the slow movement is much less of a movement, more of a way of life. It also, though, isn't particularly slow. What it recognises is the fact that sometimes we need to just step, as I said, off the treadmill. Sometimes we need to run. We need to be fast. We need to get places. We need to do things in a certain deadline. But this is not the case all the time. So here you can see some examples of where slow has been applied to every day, to the real world beyond our ivory towers. And you can see that there are a number of domains that have really embraced this idea, including our own profession. So if you look at the top right-hand side, you can see a book there called The Slow Professor, which I can heartily recommend, even though it lacks direct recommendations, which is something that my co-convener and collaborator Joe and I are looking at the moment. In terms of what slow actually is and does, here are the 9 basic principles. And on the top left-hand side of the screen, you can see the current face and voice of the slow movement. This is the journalist and author, Carl Honoré, who around 20 years ago wrote the book In Praise of Slow, which articulated these values and articulated their benefit to our species in general. The 9 principles there that you can see below are not entirely new. They're embedded and embodied in a lot of kind of well-being and mindfulness principles, but it's very rare to see them collected together. So you can see things there kind of articulating the idea that quality over quantity is useful, that consumption needs to be meaningful, that we should connect, but again, when it's meaningful and with our communities, that our practice and our everyday lives should be sustainable. We should respect and preserve where we come from. I'm going to focus us just on those last 2 on the bottom row, because I think that's something that really speaks to me as a pedagogue and as an academic, is this idea of balance. So I mentioned that slow isn't necessarily always slow, but the idea of il tempo giusto is recognizing that sometimes the world needs to be fast and recognizing sometimes the world needs to be slow, and that we should meaningfully and mindfully move between these in appropriate times. The last I really want to emphasize as well, it's the idea of pleasure and the fact that we should still be able to derive some fun from what we do, some joy. It can feel like a really futile search in our lives at the moment. If we look at what's going on in the world, if we look at our lifestyles and what's demanded of us professionally and in our home lives. But slow says pleasure should be there, and it should be there when you can find time and space for it. And if you don't have time and space for it, you should be looking to find time and space for it. In terms of then of how we deliver this to our students, we designed a module over 10 weeks that took slow and human concepts of time and married it up with diverse areas of real-world practice and human interaction and experience. So we looked at things, for example, like environmental sustainability and travel. We looked at the business world, arts. We had in weeks 6 and 7 some cognition and some positive psych. Had to get that in somewhere. And in week 8, we looked at performance. So areas where you might expect speed to equal greater success. In week 9, we looked at education, specifically higher education. And then in week 10, we paused and reflected. And in our last iteration, we had a surprise visit from Carl Honore, who we're very gratified that he's actually taken an interest in the work that we've been doing at Warwick. In terms of the pedagogical delivery, again, reflecting the 3 phases, I'm beginning to see a bit of a pattern in the things that I design. We took an orientation phase, an activity phase, and a reflection phase. Our preparation then was flipped classroom, and we released this 1 week prior to the session to enable an inclusive approach, people to engage. But despite the fact our students were constantly pushing for us to release stuff further ahead of time, we wanted to take a more gradual paced approach. So we declined respectfully to deliver anything other than our assessment brief more than a week ahead of time, to allow students to pace their own engagement with the module as well. In terms of this preparation phase, then it was delivered in a flipped classroom approach, and it had some core material that students were obliged to engage with to be able to do the activity. But other than that, we asked students to just engage with 2 hours of material to bring something different to the activity, so they could engage with what they were interested in and bring some enjoyment and pleasure to their preparation, but also to encourage some diversity of discussion when we got to the group. Each week then for 10 weeks we met in face-to-face sessions, and we had 2 hours of what I'm going to call the most exciting, passion-driven, but fly by the seat of my pants teaching. And both Joe and I said this was some of the best teaching, but the scariest teaching we've ever done. And we characterised it as the teaching that we came into higher education to do. Bear in mind, we had a small group between 15 and 20 students, but they could come from anywhere in the university, undergraduate, postgraduate, whatever. So it meant that we could be teaching what we wanted to teach to anybody with any background. So this was incredibly challenging for the groups, but also for us. And in those sessions then, we basically did highly interactive work, delivering some direct instruction, but also having demos, discussion, expert speakers, problem-based learning, mainly the activities that embodied the principles that we had. And again, we had to design this in a way that was inclusive to what our really diverse cohort brought. In terms of the reflection phase then, this was self-directed and again had this week by week approach, but it was also an ongoing principle of reflection throughout the whole module. We asked students to reflect each week on what they learned and what they had discovered about themselves, and to do this we gave them each a reflection notebook that we asked them to fill out each week. We also gave them the opportunity to engage with more advanced material from the topics that we covered each week. And we also encouraged them to look at the stuff that they chose not to engage with in the preparation phase, if it was something now that they could see a little bit more value to. In terms then of how this developed into pedagogy that both enhanced our practice, enhanced my experience as a higher education instructor, but also increased and enhanced student experience, we had a number of examples of little slow pedagogical practice that we tried to introduce. And they fell into 3 categories, the magic number 3. The first being wellbeing enhancement. We set very clear ground rules from the start about how we were going to engage with each other, and reflecting as well the propensity of self-selecting students to sometimes be very voluble, really wanting to engage, and others being much more shy and retiring, and to give a space that actually reflected both those individual differences and those differences in experience, but also what each student brought in terms of their discipline, their personalities, the way they wanted to engage. I've mentioned about the pacing and spacing of our content and the fact that we gave choice, but we also tried to focus on taking community responsibility for that learning space. And what we realised by displaying that ethos from the front of the room and in amongst students, very much embedding ourselves as learners within that group, that the group began to police itself. So when students acted in a way that didn't reflect the ethos, then students discussed it as a group and policed it without us having to kind of speak too much from the front. If we look then at the educational experience, we very much made space for fun, which in some occasions perplexed our students. They were like, well, how are we learning? And they challenged the pedagogical value of what we were doing, but that was also useful because it gave us a chance to articulate it. I've mentioned about the opportunity to engage with extended topic material and the fact we used reflective diaries. But the one thing I'd like to really focus here on in terms of educational experience is this type of teaching, this type of module, and the broadest form of interdisciplinarity that you can possibly imagine, gave us an opportunity to say to our students, deep learning, deep engagement is messy. And there's going to be times when I don't know, we don't know, you don't know, but we're going to learn together. And what we realised was that some students, whilst they were a little huffy and a little, well, what do you mean you're not the experts? And we had one brilliant quote was, I thought we were having an expert in today. And we're like, well, we kind of are the experts, but we are learning together. But we did realise how freeing the opportunity to say, actually, this is just going to be messy, but we're all going to learn, how freeing that was, while still having a very clear pedagogical framework we were working to. The last ideas then kind of bring this together in terms of contextualising it. We wanted students to have a really rounded experience, to do a little bit of everything and to experience their learning in a very different way. We wanted to acknowledge that this was going to be tricky and sometimes it was going to fall over, but we respected everything that people brought to that group, whether that was disciplinary knowledge, whether that was their individual differences, whether that was their heritage or their cultural inheritance. And that gave us the ability within that to acknowledge the really interesting tensions that a deep learning and deep engagement educational experience brings. It is not simple, it is not easy, but it's there. And if you've got time and space to engage with it, it is incredibly meaningful. So before I move on to my final case study, I'd just like to share what we discovered in our own engagement with slow pedagogy. You can see there on the right, my friend and colleague Jo. We talked together a lot about how what we were giving to students was also what we needed to give to ourselves and making that real. And we also realised that our form of il tempo giusto was that in some ways and at some times, the things that are demanded of us in our learning environment just have to be dealt with. So you deal with deadlines and you deal with delivery and you turn up on time. And you just have to breathe through that because it just is what it is. We also acknowledged that sometimes what we had was enough and it wasn't about constantly being innovative, that wasn't slow and it wasn't sustainable. And we also talked about the fact that sharing with a colleague and sharing with our students, taking responsibility for that learning environment was incredibly enriching and a source of real joy for us, even though it was challenging as it was happening. The last and overarching point then was that this balance actually works, but it is effortful. And depending on the time that you are at with your practice, your stage, it can feel more or less accessible to you. But it is worth exploring and it is worth trying to find time to put these elements of slow into your own practice. Right, I think we're on the final sector here, and this is about educational leadership. I'm hoping everybody's still with me. Please, by all means, be grabbing your cups of coffee and engaging. I can't see that anybody's having any problems. I think you can still hear me. That's great. So I'm just realizing as well that I spelt my I've spelt my PhD student Naomi's surname incorrectly. Her name is Naomi Chopra, and she's been our research lead for this project. This is a project that has been funded internally by the University of Warwick. And the reason I wanted to present it to you, well, there are two reasons. One, I'm going to share at the end because I have an ulterior motive, don't I always? But also because of some of the values and principles that I shared with you towards the start of this session. I decided that part of that it wasn't enough anymore to be sat with my friends, sometimes at the pub, sometimes after departmental seminars or meetings, just whinging about the lack of opportunity or the things that were going wrong for teaching focused staff. In this particular respect, the dearth of opportunities, particularly within departments and schools, so local opportunity for educational leadership, but also the difficulties in having that recognised when it was there. So I decided that actually this was a real put your money where your mouth is moment. And I was lucky enough to be able to get involved in a funded project investigating, exploring this within Warwick initially, and with the focus of the place and the impact of educational leadership within a research intensive institution. So that's what I'd like to share with you for the last few minutes before we move on to questions. So if we start off then, why this might be something useful to do. This is really, this is the archetypal teaching my grandmother to suck eggs, I'm afraid, because I'm sure all of you listening are aware of the benefits. But it might be more interesting then to think about why we might want to evaluate this. So very clearly, this is of personal benefit to us for our careers. It has indirect and direct applicability to our students because it impacts on teaching quality, but it also maximises the success with which our institution and our sector operates. And the main way in which it does this is by creating resilience in the system, whether that is at an institutional, sectoral or individual level. It actually builds us up as people, and it builds our connections and our networks as well as our practice. So the key question that we've been asking in this project is what factors impact? And here's the emphasis: inclusive educational leadership. So one of the things we've noticed is that once you seem to have it, then more opportunities open up to you. But it's getting that and it's embracing it throughout the teaching focus community predominantly. In terms of what we were hoping to have as research output, initially our aims were quite modest. We wanted to be able to report back to senior executive our findings, but also to provide resources for our colleagues, both within Warwick and externally, to actually engage with educational leadership themselves. The last repercussion and aim that we've had, I will share with you at end because it speaks to my ulterior motive of bringing this to you today. So this is how we've got engaged with this project, or rather Naomi has. Not really particularly groundbreaking. We've used semi-structured interviews with staff and focus groups with students. And there you can see our demographics, fairly small scale, but a absolute abundance of data. This is something people wanted to talk about. You can see then some of our key demographics. We've been able to balance roundabout between males and females, but we did have an overabundance, if you like, here of the, let's call it a sectoral stereotype of the white middle class academic. Fortunately, though, we were able to counter that with some really strong international student engagement in our student focus groups. These are the questions then we've been exploring within our project, looking at educational leadership, conceptualization, the ways in which institutional culture can influence this, any key barriers that we see, and articulating the benefits and the support and scaffolding that can be given to this. Now, again, I think we're all aware, we're back to that Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers things about some of the barriers, but this was about finding data. And it was also in the same way important to articulate why this is beneficial to everybody in this room, but not just us, also beneficial to our T&R colleagues and our research specialist colleagues. Here then, hot off the press, are our findings so far. And I should say that we haven't started formal data analysis yet. We have a lot of qualitative data to wade through, but we've been able to distill some themes and some flavours so far. So firstly, looking at educational leadership, students don't get what it is. They think it's teaching, but they are very keen to respond to this and see exceptional teaching and exemplar in its kind of psychological sense, as being key to leadership in the way they conceptualize it. They also identify the way that we interact with students and each other as being key to that leadership. So empathy, communication, and charisma. Staff understandably conceptualize educational leadership much more broadly. And you can see some of the examples, the way that this has been conceptualized and characterized. But similarly to students, then the ability to communicate clearly and to show good people skills has been seen as critical across the board in the people that we've interviewed. What has been more interesting, or most interesting, in terms of staff conceptualization, then a number of educational leadership roles have been identified, and these aren't always commensurate with status within the university or within the sector. It's been much more talking about what I affectionately call house elf work. So it's been recognized that leadership comes from within, and it can come from practice as well as the name on your against your departmental ident, or what's on your door. The second factor that we looked at then was educational culture. And interestingly, the fact that Warwick is research intensive didn't seem to really factor into people's mindset. What people were interested in was core higher education or purpose. So this is what we're here for. We're here to research, we're here to educate, we're here to bring those things together in an innovative framework. However, this was where that elephant in the room came out in spades. Okay, so looking at we asked people this specifically as well, whether they felt that there was still this second-class citizenship, and colleagues did say yes, they very much felt that there was work still to be done in terms of the reward and recognition of educational leadership coming from teaching-focused colleagues. And this was reflected in some very sadly saying, well, why would I bother trying to be an educational leader? It's too hard, it's too much work, it's pushing against the system way too much. Both groups, though, actually identified that diversity was needed, and a much stronger diverse and inclusive role modelling was needed across the sector. We all recognise, though, that this seems to have improved over the last 10 years, but more work needs to be done. This will be of no surprise then. The key barriers that we see to educational leadership are workload. So essentially the capacity to both contemplate and actively develop our practice and leading to educational leadership are prohibitive to that development. What was really gratifying and really quite sweet to see is that educational leadership remains aspirational for students. It's something they want to be able to do themselves. But across the board, for both staff and students, there was very little awareness or impact of the policy framework that governs us institutionally or governs our sector. What was much more impactful were the conventions that we saw locally. So Jag and I could talk to you about what it's like to be in the Department of Psych at Warwick. Other participants in our study could speak to what happened in their departments, but there was a lack of coherent framework there. And that led to us questioning whether that is also reflected across the sector. Lastly, then, let's finish on a high. The benefits of EL were articulated very, very clearly by our students, even though they didn't really know what it was. So they saw it as a role of sharing knowledge and expertise, and could see this feeding into their own self-efficacy as students, their engagement and their willingness to be actively engaged in their learning environment. I've put a slightly kind of oxymoronic phrase there, the aspirational glass ceiling. What our students saw, and this was a number of students in our focus groups, saw the diversity and inclusivity of educational leadership as a glass ceiling to shatter. They perceived the glass ceiling, but they wanted to take this to a new dimension with their work. So for us, then, we can see the benefits of educational leadership, but people were much more likely to relate that to their practice relating to students. And this is perhaps the crux. I started off with this idea of the perception that once you have educational leadership, then the opportunities for educational leadership are much more open to you. So one of the gaps that we've already identified, even at this preliminary level, are filling that gap and scaffolding that ability for for staff to get that initial foot in the door in terms of educational leadership. To do this, then, we saw the roles of both internal and external organisations and networks such as this in promoting the work we do on our educational leadership. But we also identified the fact that typically teaching focused, education focused colleagues need to move beyond their own local environment to be able to flex their educational leadership muscles. We saw a really critical role for the training that we're given. And that's not to say we don't have the skills already, but it's in formalising and recognising those. And also not only building our leadership confidence, but our confidence as well. I purposely put in that tagline about imposter syndrome. I think everybody in this room today has experienced that in some way. And what we saw in our participants and what we recognised in ourselves as well when we were discussing this as a group before we started the project was how that scaffolding had actually supported us. For students, they don't see any support available. So this is all happening behind the scenes, which adds to the mystique, but it also adds to the aspiration. But they do see that here at Warwick, in that research intensive environment where we worry that it impacts more on our ability to exert educational leadership, that the inclusivity is developing. And students see that clearly, which is good to know. Right. I'm out of breath. I'm out of puff. And here is the ulterior motive. So on the left-hand side, you can see the contact details for the 3 staff members of the educational leadership team. I'm really pleased and proud and more than a little chuffed to share with you that we have been accepted as a special issue of Perspectives, which should land in fall 2027. And the call for papers is just going out. It's either out now or it will be out in the next couple of days. So if anything that I have shared with you today, or specifically within this last section looking at educational leadership, has any resonance or you're interested in contributing to that special issue, please do get in touch. We'd be absolutely delighted to hear from you. And thank you very much for giving me a platform for a plug for the special edition. I am simultaneously exhilarated because I've never done this before and utterly terrified because I've never done this before. So, last slide of my presentation before we move into questions. This was the framework for my practice and my principles, my values, if you like. And I'm really hoping that in some way that I have embodied those ideas. And you can see, without me kind of pointing out, this is where I've been passionate, this is where I've been strategic, the ways in which I've tried to live those principles. Like I said right at the start, I'm very happy if you want to call me on it or you want to question where I've engaged with that. And I do appreciate here, these will be values and principles by which you live your lives, your professional lives and your home lives as well. So I'm not professing anything groundbreaking. But to me, what brings all these ideas together is authenticity. And I'm really hoping that if nothing else, that's what I've brought for you today. Thank you very much for your time and thank you for listening. Does anybody have any questions for me? I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you, Liz. That was amazing, and I really want to take some of those principles of just slow teaching, and for myself as well. So that was really inspirational, and the project as well, and the work that you're doing with the Utopia as well. I've got one question here, and then I can open up, and I have questions as well, but I'm going to allow other people to ask those questions. Are you able to send out the call for the special edition to TFun?
I would be really happy to do that. I have never done, like I say, this is completely new to me. It's that moment where it's the moment with that slide at the start that I'm stepping out of the aircraft at however many thousand feet. I think it's a parachute. I'm not entirely certain, but I know there's deep water underneath me. So, but I'm very happy to do that. And it would be wonderful if anybody would like to contribute in any way. It'd be great to hear from you.
That will be amazing. We have a couple of hundred people on the JISC email list, so we can get that out. And hopefully people who are interested can get in contact, and it will be a wonderful addition that I look forward to. Okay, so on that,
Me too.
Liz, thank you so much. And I'll just open up to some questions from the audience before I ask my own. Got a couple. Anyone got any questions for Liz?
Sorry if I missed it. How did you set up the kind of EU collaboration, like, to start with?
Thank you for, yeah, and again, it's, I think, one of the problems when you're putting together something about your practice. Thank you, Liam. I think sometimes when you're putting together the practice, it's really hard to see where you need to inform people because it's what you do, right? Utopia was something that was done at an institutional level. So the organisation that came from this was from above. It's like we've identified this is the model, the connected learning communities. We've identified some areas that we think students will be interested in and where we have expertise. And then you were recruited into role. And I was asked to represent psychology and Warwick. But it came from where we had kind of areas, pockets of expertise, if you like, already there. So we had the benefit of, we had the benefit of a pan-European, and there have been moments where things have kind of come in from the EU, and you're like, oh, we're doing that then, are we? But what we realised with that structure is once we got institutional engagement, we got the model in place, then it was left to us pretty much within our local CLC structure to organise it. So we had the freedom to move from the format that we had to the new model, which worked. And it was beautiful, and I love it. And thank you for letting me be proud of my educational baby. I don't get to say that very often. I just sit there and go, oh, thank goodness, and that's over, and I can now rest. But thank you. I can't tell you how lovely it is to meet with like-minded people and to go, do you know what? I'm kind of proud of what I've achieved there. We don't say it enough, and I find it really difficult to say. So thank you for giving me the space to say it.
And the partnerships have developed over time as well, from what I know. So they started off with a couple, and then they have grown over time. But it is that that they did start off. Yeah.
What's really interesting with our CLC, so I've actually devolved from this, and we now have a bilateral arrangement between ourselves and Gothenburg. Because we created the educational offering, it worked, it was scalable, it did all the things, it ticked all the boxes. And at that point, it's like, well, what are we doing that's meaningfully connected anymore? Why don't we just run this? Let's embed it in our institutional practice, and let's see but still getting the interdisciplinarity, still getting the internationalization, but actually being able, so Warwick students or Gothenburg students or Ljubljana students being able to see the applicability of this directly to their studies, rather than being something kind of ephemeral floating around in the Utopia ether. We've now embedded that, but they still have that badging, and they still have that ability to get the micro credentials from Utopia. I hope that answered. I realise I rabbit a lot. Once you start me going, it's really difficult to stop me. Jen and Jag know this.
Yeah, it's so nice to see your passion there and your excitement about it. I think you are right that it's so nice to meet with like-minded people and to be able to go, isn't this really cool? And us all go, yeah, it is. Liam.
Yeah, well, I just I'll join into the isn't this really cool? I really enjoyed the kind of slow learning module stuff. I find that it reminded me of I got really into reading some stuff by a guy called Cal Newport a few years ago, who does very similar kind of slow. Yeah, he's an academic over in the States, but similar ideas about slow productivity in academia, and the idea that we're actually Yeah, I do think in some ways, teaching focused academics have a harder time doing that kind of stuff than, like, in research spaces, you're allowed to kind of go, well, no, this is my protected research time in which I'm going to move at the speed that is most appropriate for my discipline or whatever, which is very much Cal Newport when he's talking about it. He's talking about his research, not his teaching. But no, in general, that and reading that, I got really interested in, and I never got a chance to do it, but stuff around, which it sounds like you did, like teaching students some kind of practical skills about what it means to be productive, or how to manage your productivity in a way, like digital minimalism, I know, was one of like Cal Newport's themes. I don't know if you discussed that, but that kind of stuff around, like, actually, if you want to be productive, there's all these competing forces as a young person nowadays that you probably need to manage against. Yeah.
One of the things that I didn't share, but Jag has seen, what we did for our for our assessment of this, which you can imagine this was incredibly challenging to assess. We did a portfolio.
What was the assessment?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, okay. And in fact, actually, have we got time? Because I've got the slide. I can show you. Have I got? Oh no, that's us. My apologies. Let's open that up again.
Yeah, we've got until Liz, so plenty of time.
Brilliant. So if I stop showing that, if I get instead, let's share this properly. Okay, if we go down to my last slide. So we got our students to do a portfolio that comprised creative pieces, but loosely creative. So it could be classically kind of artistic or poetry. But it could also be something like we got them to design a slow marketing campaign, design a slow module, design a slow pos psych intervention, a slow marketing campaign, all sorts of things. If I actually share this and things, I might be able to give you a little bit of a let's see if we can get this to sound. Can people hear that? Can anybody hear? Can you hear anything? No, people aren't shaking hands. I'll stop that. So one of our students created a slow piece of music, a 13-minute piece of music for part of their portfolio. But here's some of the artwork that we saw. Jag, I know you particularly like this, where we had a student that you can see the black and white picture they created. This was a computer science student that designed a piece of work, drew it themselves using particular kind of mental prompts, and then used the same mental prompts to recreate it in AI. So we had the contrast of the fast and slow. We had somebody that did, this is a traditional form of, you might be able to see the blue whale there, a traditional form of Japanese embroidery that's incredibly labour intensive and time consuming. We had a picture that was made of leaves that was designed to decay over time. This I loved. This was a line of crochet that each line represented a day that the student undertook the assignment, and it records the temperature across that day. So they took records across that day and recorded it over that time. We had slow cooking blogs, we had student experience blogs, we had students doing a slow trial itinerary. So we got them to create all these different things, but then we asked them to reflect on it, because I'm not enough of an artist or a poet to be able to compare different ideas, but we asked them to tell us how they had critically engaged with the values of the slow movement to create their piece, what it meant to them. And then as the other part, so they did that for 2 pieces, and then they wrote an overall reflection talking about the module, what insights had given them, how it had changed their insight, how they had changed their practice, what it meant to them educationally and in the real world. And some of the things that they said about it, frankly, they made us cry. I've stopped trying to chase grades. I understand that doing this and gaining something from it is much more important. It's the stuff that we get out of bed and hope that our students will pick up from a particular from a particular point, but it's a challenge, I think, and you do feel like students are kind of bearing their souls to you. But then, you know, that's the messy, deep learning, deep engagement that you have with them. I was hoping somebody would ask so I could go, and here's one I prepared, or rather they prepared earlier. But a phenomenal amount of just real, genuine, I want to throw myself into this. If anybody at some point wants to listen, I think the link with this, I'm happy to do the slides. Thank you, Liam. I agree.
I think you had like a comment I absolutely empathized with about marking earlier, but I can imagine marking that was about one of the few times you actually maybe enjoyed the marking experience.
I did, but it's also difficult because when you can see a student has poured their heart and soul into something. I mean, this is being recorded, so I'm going to be very circumspect about what I say. Yeah, there were times that we read some very angsty teenage poetry that was just like, oh, okay, we've all been here. But I'm no judgment there. They expressed it in the way they did, but that was kind of like, you compare something where you could see somebody engaging, but on a superficial level, and then something where they have spoken from their hearts, and you're like, oh, okay. So it's a privilege, but it's also incredibly difficult to put a grade on that. And I did have to write some very careful feedback, which is, this piece is exquisite and you have blown me away. However, you've written a really dodgy reception. I can't give you a great mark now. And you've kind of broken my heart. But again, being authentic in that moment, I felt I had to express that. And I was even called on it by an external examiner who said, you need to be more professional in your feedback. And we pushed back and said, no, we're here to be real.
It would be interesting to know. So my wife, my partner's an illustrator and went through various art colleges. It'd be interesting to know from so we've got a College of Art in Edinburgh, you do too, but like how they do it and because they must encounter these challenges all the time, that people are bearing their souls through producing artwork as assessment all the time, and there must be a level of detachment that they have to exercise. So yeah.
And that's why we decided to use a small, I mean, it felt quite pedestrian in comparison, but, you know, we were very open and honest. And it's like about sharing that community responsibility for the pedagogical space and saying, we can't judge whether your artwork is good or not. We know whether we're enjoying it. But what we're going to be evaluating you on is your articulation of how that speaks to the object.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
But yeah, a number of hearts broken and I'd say a number of tears shed, and there was a piece a student did in our first iteration that was called A Cry for a Slow University, that was a spoken poetry piece with intercut videos of herself and of her life. And we sent it to our ed exec and said, you need to watch this. And we both cried, both Joe and I, we just and then we told the student we'd cried, and then we're just like, oh, okay. So very, very, I'm so glad this is being recorded, right? All veneer of professionalism has now disappeared.
But I think crying is unprofessional. If it's, you know, you're an empathic professional engaged with your practice. I push back on not being able to be a human in my job quite a lot, I think. Yeah.
Well, you'd say that, but again, you know, you go into the educational leadership and then you talk to a TNR colleague, and not all TNR, this feels awful, doesn't it? TNR colleagues, but not all TNR colleagues. And they kind of go, well, why do you engage with your students so deeply? This is what we're supposed to do. If you're doing it, do it properly. In my humble opinion.
I think your module has really given you space to do that, to, you know, some of the assessments that we do. I just there was one particular piece, and I think I've spoken to you about this already, Liz, is when they drew, you know, they did it themselves, they drew it, and then they had AI, the slow and then the fast. I thought that was such a sign of the times, in a sense, of where we are, and even sometimes the approaches that maybe possibly students are taking when it comes to new technology and how it's become making us fast, and we're asking people to be slow and really think deeply about what the assessment is, what is being asked. But then you've got these tools at your hand, that are, hey, we can, and it'll be really, what is going on in those particular, as a psychologist, like those particular decision making moments, but from that framework. Yeah, it was great. Thank you.
That's interesting to hear as well, Liam.
Yeah. And
it gives you one hand, takes away the other, right?
My career to move to an school of education, but I like it here. I like the mindset that everyone's bought in. The idea that education is important.
Yeah. And I know this is probably blue sky thinking here, but I think this is a great space to do that. And I was reflecting on your utopia and how you've been able to come together with other universities across Europe, because there is that infrastructure that has been developed. But how amazing would it be if, institutes, psychology departments, if that there is space to offer those micro credentials across institutes, and I know that, but this is the structural issues that we have, where students can actually not just obviously internationalization, but even across institutes. If you're studying in Scotland, or if you're studying in Wales, if you're studying in London or in the Midlands, how does that shape your experiences? And then also the international aspect. I just think I'm going to put this, wouldn't it be great if we had a short micro-credential course where, if we're doing Utopia, how can other places partner up as well within, and I don't know how that would work.
Yeah, watch this space. We have big ideas, but it's about, to me, it's about biting off what you can chew. And that's about the strategic bit. It's like, let's find something that works, and then let's make it scalable, and then let's bring other people in. What you might be interested to know as well is that what started off as a essentially education focus has now brought in research collaborations as well. So we're doing collaborative interdisciplinary work with the University of Gothenburg. Our students are being research assistants, being participants. And hopefully we'll start to get this as a more kind of integrated area of interdisciplinary and international practice that can both capitalise on those relationships and those connections, but also not rely on the resources to travel. So mindful of sustainability, and also the fact that our students and as a staff, we don't always have those resources now, but belts are tightening. So it has, and that's what I mean. It seems to be you have one area that gives you that chance to flex your muscles, and then the other examples coming in. With the marking criteria, with the portfolio. Actually, I can share those with you, but they were fairly standard ones about your ability to show critical reflection, evidence of engagement with the principles, technical understanding of the slow movement and its role in your field. Yeah, if people don't mind, I will get permission first from my co-collaborator. I can't see there being a problem, but I'd be happy to share those once I have her permission. And if anybody ever happens to be Warwick Way when we're teaching that, or if we have one of our Utopia sessions, or if you want to listen to our educational leadership podcasts, they'll be in the special issue. We'd love to see. We do occasionally have visitors into both the internationalization sessions and the slow movement, and we're hoping, keep your fingers crossed for us, that Carl Honoré has said he wants to come back and meet our students again, which is very interesting because quite a lot of them have older man silver fox syndrome, and we had some audible gasps as he came into the room last time, which was a little bit interesting to. It was like, we were pretty sure that he would be used to handling 30 middle-aged women. What we didn't realise that he had to deal with kind of 21-year-olds kind of like this. It was like, oh, okay. We shall now form a ring of steel around Carl Honoré, but it was yeah, in our own little way. But that's been lovely how he, having somebody from the real world go, this is a cool thing. And you know, just coming and talking and engaging with our students. So yeah, if there's any of this is any interest to you, you've got my email. Please do get in contact, and I will check. I have made a note about the marking criteria for those. If we can't, thank you, Jan. I really I appreciate that. If I can't send it out in the document form, I'll do some kind of summary that we're happy with, so you can see the way that we approach it. Very happy to do that for you. Okay. Right. Any more? We
have 2 minutes, just 2 minutes left. But if I'm just thinking time-wise, Liam is.
Well, if I'm really honest and really authentic, I'm about to get some keys for a new property that I'm moving into today. So life is landing on me with a huge. Come and visit Jen. Well, come and visit anybody. You heard it here first.
I think it will be great as well. I know we've got the in September the TFun festival. So Liz, we would you know, love to hear more, and the recording will be available. So for those you know who are, and we know that July, the end of July, is a really busy time with graduation, trying to get in annual leave. So you will have this recording available. And Liz, is it okay if we have the slides alongside the recording?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So there will be Liz's.
Very happy to do that.
So Liz's details, if you'd like to know more about your journey with Utopia, and how you know some of the. It's never a straight journey, is it? It's never linear in that sense, and really interested in some of the slow work. And I was thinking about, so I've done some participatory research, and actually I needed to be slower with that, and that is probably an area that this really aligns to. But how could we incorporate some of the ideas with our first years, because it's such a, especially in that welcome week, it's so fast, you know, just to get people, students, just to get them to think about this, and maybe even just, I don't know, sort of a bite-sized podcast that possibly we could share, or I don't know. I think it's just such a phenomenal area that I need to reflect and do some more of this. And yes, if anybody wants to get involved with the educational leadership program, there's Liz's email. Please do contact Liz directly. Liz, thank you so much for your time today. It's been fantastic to hear all the amazing work that you're doing, and I should say I'm honoured to be like a few doors down from you, where I can just pop in and ask questions, maybe a bit too much of the time, but thank you so much for today. I know it's a busy time for everyone. On that note, I will stop the recording, and I will get this uploaded in the next few days, maybe early next week, alongside your slides. Thank you, Liz, for your time today.
Thank you.
I'll just stop the recording now. Okay.